Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mekong Club working group. Today, our topic is strengthening responsible recruitment, recruitment fee remediation, like it's toolkit presentations where we will invite our advisor to present our toolkit. Before we start, I just want to do like a small reminder that for today's sections, we will be operating under Chatham House rule, and that will be recording of the speaker's presentation for association members who are not currently in the current time zone to view. But the guided discussion will not be recorded by video. The Mekong Club will capture the key takeaways of the discussion section to be circulated to all association members. So that's the rules, the house rules for the working group. For those who have not seen me before, my name is Catherine Chung, and I'm the senior consultant at the Mekong Club, who is responsible for membership for the retail and manufacturing industries. And today here we had some of the colleagues from the Mekong Club as well as our speaker, and I will talk about it a little later. So for the responsible recruitment has become a global expectations, but remediation of the recruitment fees remains one of the least understood and most complex area. That's the reason why we are organizing this section today to talk about the remediation toolkit. And for some of you may have known that like the CBP from the US recently issued a WRO on the Taiwanese manufacturer earlier this year, which highlights the importance for us for some of the recruitment practice that might lead to serious trade and reputational consequences. And so a lot of brands and suppliers are urgently trying to understand what fair recruitment looks like in practice. And that's the reason why we have created the remediation toolkit for the audience, and which will be discussed today. And without further delay, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, which is Mahila Lak, our responsible recruitment advisor at the Mekong Club, with over 10-year experience advancing fair recruitment and migrant worker protection, including 7 years leading an ethical recruitment agencies for migrant workers. So she currently works supporting the IOM and Philippine government on strengthening recruitment agency standard, and also working on remediation projects for migrant workers in Taiwan. So without further delay, let's welcome Mahi to present for today's presentations, and I'll pass the mic to Mahi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. It's great to see all of you attend. I'm really happy to be speaking about this topic because I've been working with migrant workers for a while. So we'll start with a little question for you because we want to make this session a bit interactive, because at the end of the day, this is a working group, so we want everyone to be able to participate. So you can scan the QR code on the left with your phone. And the first question is, are you working on responsible recruitment practices, like the employer pays principle, or assessing recruitment fees in your supply chain? Do you have current projects on this? Feel free to scan and to vote through your phones. Okay, interesting. We have, for now, a majority currently actively implementing these practices. All right. Okay, so most of you are currently actively working on this. One person planning to implement, and then others evaluating or not currently involved, but probably looking for information on this. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we'll to start with, I think we'll go back to the basics of recruitment fees. So understanding why recruitment fees are an indicator of forced labor and are a red flag when it comes to forced labor risk. So workers, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the topic, right? But a lot of migrant workers, and actually the IOM defines migrant workers are both as both internal migrants that go from one region to another, and foreign migrants that travel from another country. So depending on the countries where you are based or your supplier are based, you probably have different migration corridors and nationalities, but the principle and the issues remain the same everywhere. So we have sorry. We have migrant workers or local workers that to find a job are going through agents, and those agents are actually charging recruitment fees for them. So depending on the country, it can go up to like 6,000 US dollars, even more sometimes, really depending on the migration corridor. And because they have to pay those fees upfront, so we will also go through what is a recruitment fee and the related costs associated with that are included into the broad understanding of recruitment fees from international standards. So when they pay upfront for these fees, they have to go into debt. So it could be, it could be the agency loaning to them. It could be loan sharks in many times because the workers cannot necessarily use banking services. It can be family savings and things like that. The thing with those loans is that when you go to a loan shark, the loan can be up to a 60% interest rate, which is absolutely a crazy amount of money to pay back. And sometimes you also have agencies that require you to provide your ID. So it could be a passport, it could be your local ID until you've finished paying the loan. So the recruitment fee and it incurs the debt and also sometimes restriction of movement because the workers are not able to leave the employment unless they have paid the debt entirely because they still have this debt to pay back home or in the country where they're working. So this actually triggers two forced labor indicators, and we will also talk about it a bit later. But this actually triggers debt bondage and restriction of movements because of the debt, but also because there's usually also passport retention included in this process. Yeah, you can go to the next one, please. So why are we talking about migrant workers specifically? Of course, not only migrant workers are paying are paying recruitment fees. As I mentioned, you have local migrant workers and you have also foreign migrant workers, but we often hear more about the foreign migrant workers that pay those recruitment fees. And why are they more vulnerable? So first of all, well, I will go to point two instead of point one first, but the language and communication barrier is quite high. So, for example, if you have, I mean, if I take the example of Taiwan, where I'm working at the moment, you have migrant workers from Indonesia, from Vietnam, from the Philippines, from Thailand, and some of them have some knowledge of speaking Mandarin, right? But not all of them. So it makes communication a bit more complicated, which means that they rely on translators. And in some countries, actually, translators are provided by the recruitment agency, which makes it a very biased channel of communication for the workers. So that is something to take into account. And they also have, let's say, the contract might be in Chinese with a translation. The pay slips or the bank accounts might be in Chinese. So you have to make sure that those migrant workers have access to all resources and to all their administrative papers and communication channels in their native language to make sure that they have representation. When it comes to the limited voice and representation, it is sometimes they might not be as vocal as other local workers, for example, because they have more at stake when it comes to they have a debt to pay back, but they also are they may be they're under a visa, so they may be scared of of having no employment in the future, to be sent back in their home country. Of course, it depends on the local laws as well. You also have, for example, I'm thinking for women migrant workers, there's higher risk when it comes to pregnancy. With, sometimes they might be requested to go back home because they're pregnant. So there is really limited voice and representation for them. They're not always represented in workers' committee. We've seen that usually workers' committees have less migrant workers in them than they have local workers, and also when it comes to unions as well. So limited voice and representation. For social isolation, a lot of times the migrant workers in the factory will stay, for example, in the dormitories. They are together, but they don't have as much social contact with the outside as other local workers that may have, a life outside work. They're often far from home. They're far from their family. And that creates more isolation for them. When it comes to restricted access and protection, to protection and benefits, the channels to access government grievances and government benefits are more difficult to access for migrant workers usually. And family pressure, as I mentioned, they're usually far from family, and there is some guilt on their part on missing out, for example, on the life of their children. Like I've been working with women migrant workers a lot, and the guilt is very present to not be there for their children, seeing them grow up. So, and the family is asking for money in return. So the pressure to and the guilt to send remittances back to kind of make up for the time that has been lost working abroad is very harsh on migrant workers, which also, the social isolation plus the family pressure can also be very draining on their mental health. So those are all the reasons why we usually say that migrant workers are more vulnerable. You can go to the next one. Okay, now we're going to talk about compliance. So there is definitely a compliance gap between local laws and international standards. So depending on where you're currently based, you may have to follow your local laws or international standards. We usually say we take the highest the highest applicable between the two, the highest standard between local law and international standard. But what you will see is that when you talk about recruitment fees in a lot of countries, those fees are still legal, whether it's the sending country or it is the receiving country, the deployment country. So if I'm taking the example of Taiwan again, the recruitment fees are legal in the Philippines for land-based workers up to 1 month, and in Taiwan, it depends on the fees. You have broker fees, you have a lot of different ones. But usually, when you talk to suppliers that are in certain countries, they will say, "Well, I am compliant with my local law." So there is a gap there that if you want to set the international standard when it comes to recruitment fees, you will have to engage into helping, like maybe capacity building programs, but helping understand why this international standard is in place and why you want to implement it, and what are the risks. So that could be a business risk, that could be, financial risk, that could be reputational risk, a legal risk on your end. So you will have to explain why you think this is a risk and why you want to implement this, because the internal buy-in is going to be critical for adoption of a zero fee policy. And I think, as Catherine mentioned, right, we've seen the recent case of Giant in Taiwan. And I think that was quite a shock on Taiwan side, in terms of we've been talking about recruitment fees remediation for a while, and I think for a lot of brands, Taiwan has been one of their priorities. But seeing that there is such a huge impact for one company has really shaken the space in terms of accelerating recruitment fees remediation and working on this topic. So I think that's an example that you can use when you want to implement it with the companies you're working with as a case example of there can be a huge business risk also on this part. Another issue that may arise is that a lot of companies rely heavily on recruitment agencies when hiring the migrant workers. So the recruitment agencies send the workers, but so you have two recruitment agencies. You have the one in the sending country and the one in the country where they're deployed. And the company will often rely heavily on the recruitment agency where the migrant workers are deployed. So that means, as I mentioned before, that could be extra services. So that could be, oh, we need a translator, and then the translator will live in the dormitory with the migrant workers so that they are so the agency will provide extra services. They can bring the workers to the hospital if they have any issue, to medical appointment, renew their passport. So there's a heavy trust between companies sometimes and the recruitment agencies, which can create some gaps for the recruitment agencies if they're unethical actors to take advantage of the workers because they know more about the personal life of the worker and how they're doing, and they're more in direct contact with them than the management of the company might be. And then the other thing is new regulations and international standards are setting higher expectations. So of course we've been talking about CS triple D for a while in Europe. It's still ongoing on this side, but we've seen from the giant case, like the US has also set new standards, right, when it comes like clear boundaries for forced labor in supply chains. So here you have like sometimes a false sense of compliance where suppliers may appear compliant locally, and they are. So let's not diminish that they are compliant with the local laws. But if you want to set a higher expectation on international standards, you will have to also, explain and also be involved in this, because while compliant with local law doesn't mean that you're not exposing yourself to forced labor findings and reputational risks. Okay, next one. Okay, so we'll go through the international standards on fair and ethical recruitment. So I'm sure all of you, since you're working on this topic, have heard about the employer pays principle. So meaning that no worker should pay for a job. The cost of recruitment should be borne not by the worker, but by the employer. So this relies on several principles, right? So we have, of course, the DACA principles. So no fees are charged to migrant workers. And as I mentioned, also, this triggers indicators of forced labor. So on the right, you have all the 11 indicators of forced labor, and it triggers restriction of movement and also debt bondage. We can go next. When it comes to the different international standards, so you have some ILO standards. So I've put here the ILO Convention 181, which can be helpful, but it's not ratified by all countries. So I'm thinking in particular, the Philippines hasn't ratified it. But this convention actually covers that recruitment agencies, private employment agencies, should not charge fees. So if you can check this one, if the agency is in a country that has ratified the convention, that is to be checked. They could, for example, be involved in the repayment process. You also have ILO has general principles and operational guidelines when it comes to fair recruitment, and they also have the definition of recruitment fees and related costs that we will see after. So from the ILO standard, all these recruitment fees should be reimbursed to the workers and should be part of what is borne by the employer. DACA principle, I already mentioned it. You also have the UNGPs, the OECD framework that talk about remedy. so that companies must prevent, mitigate, and remediate adverse human rights impacts in their operations and supply chains. We'll see later that sometimes the international standard is not very clear on practical guidance. So these international standards, they prohibit charging recruitment fees, but they limit the practical guidance on how repayments should happen. And that's often where, since it's up to interpretation, and we'll see it after, but for example, the UNGP says in a timely manner, which for a lot of brands and suppliers can be difficult to understand, because what is timely? Timely, is it 1 month? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? What is timely? So it is clear that those international standards, they provide the basis, right? But they do lack the practical guidance on things. Seems like there is an emerging will to to have more guidance from international organizations. So I'm thinking, for example, I've seen recently that the IOM has started looking for people to, for example, kind of compile business cases. I think they do want to. I mean, it is my understanding, so don't quote me on this, but I do see some movements on this side from international organizations. But it's still a lot of companies are still relying on practical guidance from NGOs and consultancies. Okay, we can go to the next one. Okay, so what are recruitment fees and related costs? So under the ILO principles, recruitment fees are payments for recruitment services offered by labor recruiters, whether it's public or private, for the employment, for matching the employment. Payments made in the case of recruitment of workers, with whether it's to the labor broker themselves, or it could be to a sub-agent also, because labor brokers usually, so a lot of labor brokers have an agency in the capital or in big cities, but then if they want to recruit in the province, they will have, which might be illegal, they have sub-agents or people that they send in the province to recruit. So sometimes those sub-agents also ask for money. Or even when the migrant workers found, let's say you posted a job offer online on social media, a lot of migrant workers report that they found the offer on social media or through a friend. Actually, behind the offer on social media or behind the friend is a sub-agent. So I would suggest, if migrant workers say that they have found your offer on social media or through a friend, it doesn't mean that they haven't found the job offer through a sub-agent and they haven't paid. Because oftentimes you have people reposting your job offers to the migrant workers, or sometimes, pretending to be a labor broker and posting those offers, and they will ask for recruitment fees to the workers, whether they come from another country, or sometimes they will ask for transfer fees or fees to, how do they say that? They say like to secure the employment. So whether they're in their country of origin or in the deployment country, be wary of those social media posts or friends. They are sometimes asking for payment also. So those recruitment fees basically cover everything. So they cover any administrative visa fee. So anything, yeah, the visa payment, the verification of contracts, things like that. But they also cover medical costs. So there's usually a fit to work medical check before arriving, before deployment and after deployment in both countries. So those medical costs are to be included. Be careful of extra medical costs that are charged by the agencies. Sometimes, I'm not saying that all agencies are bad. Of course, there are a lot of good agencies as well, but you have some agencies that will add extra medical checks that are not necessarily, but they will say that they are. So, for example, an X-ray, it could be an additional blood test, and those would be sometimes paid by cash or things like that. So just be careful of the different medical costs. You have insurance costs. So sometimes you have an insurance in the origin country and usually an insurance in the arrival country. Whether you include them or not, in the ILO standards, you are supposed to include them. I'm thinking, for example, in the Philippines, you have an insurance in the Philippines that is called PhilHealth, that should be included. And then you have also insurances, the medical insurance and labor, like sometimes government labor insurance in the country of arrival. You have costs for skills and qualification tests. So that could be language tests that people have to pay for a certificate for or have to pay classes before they come, or that could be, sometimes I've heard of also speed tests on how fast they can process some orders and things like that. So those are also any cost associated is to be included. You also have cost for training and orientation. So pre-orientation, pre-departure trainings, for example, are supposed to be free. Equipment costs, I'm thinking about, the health and safety equipment are to be included. Travel and lodging costs. So here I'm not talking about the dormitory once the workers are deployed. I am talking about when, as I mentioned, agencies are usually in the capital. So workers in the province will have to travel to report to the agency one or two times. So sometimes one time at first and one time before flying. These travel costs plus the accommodation costs near the agency are to be included as well. So sometimes agencies include them, sometimes they don't. So just to let you know that these costs are also to be included. Administrative costs, and then you have all illegitimate costs and reasonable undisclosed, so like bribes, extortion, kickbacks, collaterals. Yeah, and you have some agencies that will also be careful of agencies coaching the workers because they sometimes know that those costs are not to be paid. So some of them are legal, some of them are not. And agencies may threaten the workers or tell the workers that they should not mention it. Another thing is that a lot of times there is no evidence for these costs. In an ideal world, right, the workers should have a service agreement with the agency, and the agency should put on that service agreement the breakdown of what is included, and the worker should agree and sign, and should have a receipt for every cost. In reality, there is no receipts. Most of times there is no receipt, or if you have workers that have been working in the same company for 12 years or that are transferred and they arrived like 20 years ago, they don't have those evidences. The evidence burden is on the employer. It is not on the migrant worker. So in remediation of recruitment fees, we don't necessarily ask the workers to provide evidence because we understand that they do not, in the majority of cases, they do not have any receipt for the payments that they've made. Okay, you can go to the next one, please. All right. So yeah, I was talking about um, the repayment timelines under the international standards. So under international standards now, there is no fixed timeline, for example. So it should be predictable and timely, which, that's the reason why we rely on good practices that have been done. It's still quite a new topic, so there is a lot of guidance that is around and that is very helpful for if you want to start your remediation process. Okay, next one. Okay, yeah, another thing that is quite interesting is that under the UNGP's remediation is not only monetary. So monetary remediation is, of course, quite effective, but it's not the only thing that you can do if you want to demonstrate, good practice and goodwill to the workers. It can also be, remedy can also include apologies, restitution, rehabilitation, and non-financial compensation. So apologies also go a long way and can be also part of your remediation process on explaining clearly why you are doing this and the reason behind it, and that you can apologize to the workers for them having to pay for those fees and things like that. So not only monetary to keep in mind, that is quite an important part, I think. Okay, next one. Okay, so we talked about the international standards, that they were lacking a little bit of practical guidance. And the reason why we did this toolkit is not to reinvent the wheel. I'm going to share the toolkit, but it is to kind of compile all the existing guidance that is out there. So it draws on, so the idea is for you to have everything in one place that you can use in a very practical way. So here we've started by, of course, the scope limitations of the guideline. I will go through it pretty quickly, but you can have a look later. So we started with all the key definitions and indicators. So here you have all the international standards, the definitions, what is included as a recruitment fee, who are migrant workers, the ILO forced labor indicator, recruitment fees and labor risk, the UNG, what do the UNGP say? So Pillar 3 is on access to remedy. Why does this matter? What are the key expectations? The different sources if you want to have more information. And then on the key principle, we also put every principle has a why it matters and application in practice, a checklist of what you can do within your organization. So the goal for this is really to gather the existing information. We're not reinventing anything, but to have things in one place that you can use and for it to be practical so that you can use it yourself, but also if you need to explain to your business partners, whether it's to create internal buy-in or to kind of engage with recruitment fees and zero fee policy discussions with your suppliers, it's also something that you can use, and you can find great information here to back what you're saying. So we're also talking about non-retaliation, grievance mechanisms, checklist of things that you need to do before you start, and then you have like different steps. So the first step, assessing your own maturity and readiness, and then so we're talking about everything that you can put into place and things that the Mekong Club can also help you with. Some FAQ. So actually, if you have any other questions once you go through this document that you think should be included in the FAQ, make sure to let the Mekong Club team know. I think it's a tool that, I mean, the goal of this organization is also for people to be able to collaborate together. So it's not a fixed thing. It's a version of guidance that we've put together. But if in the future you have things that you think should be included, or maybe you have some thoughts on it, feel free to let the team know. And I think that could be also very interesting feedback. So we've also put some guidance on conducting the investigation. Among the main resources, I think the impact resource is very good. And also the consumer goods forum one is also pretty good. It is also something that has been recommended to me to use by Verite. So those are the main organizations that are working on those issues, and they have very, very good guidance, and they've gone through a lot of remediation cases. So highly recommend. So here you have all the sources, but you also have kind of a summary of the different things that they mention. We go through determine the scope of remediation, conducting the investigation, report findings, calculating the repayment amount, because we will see it on a next slide, the different things that to take into account during the repayment, but the repayment methods, including currency inflation, interest rates. So there's a lot to think about that is in this guide. So I invite you to have a look at it. Feel free to provide some feedback on it. That would be quite interesting also. And one thing that I think is quite interesting is also the empowering the workers through awareness access, because I mean, the investigation and the calculation are, of course, a big part of this process, but engaging with the workers is also a pretty tough part, I would say, because you have to explain to workers, because when you calculate the amount that you will reimburse to workers, usually you will calculate it in different batches. So that would be depending on the nationality, depending on the year they started, depending on the labor recruiter that they used. They will have a different average of repayments. Now, you will have to explain to the workers why you did this process and why people are getting reimbursed. Why are there different averages? You will have to engage them for the recruitment plan, to engage with them and to explain, if they have any additional thing that they want to include, if they have thoughts on it, you'll have to also hear their voices. And let's not forget the local workers, because if you pay back all migrant workers, you will also have to engage with the local workers to explain why are the migrant workers getting money from this process. So yeah, it's a good way to engage with the workers through different means, depending on, I mean, I think you know your workers best, but it's a work that touches on grievance mechanisms as well. So yeah, it is quite an interesting part as well. And then, of course, continuous improvement, to evaluate and improve the process, because remediation is just the first step of this process. And then, if we want to really to really have an impact, wait, I'm just going back to the conversation. Up. If you want to have an impact on the long run, of course, you will have to also change the way you hire people, and the way, I mean, whether it's you or your suppliers, the way people are hired in practice, and the way we engage with recruitment agencies. Yep. So I think, if you can go back to the presentation, Catherine, please. Okay. In terms of the repayment cost to keep in mind, so of course, so you see different cases where people go for the highest amount paid amongst the workers. What is usually, or individual repayment sometimes, it can be quite difficult depending on the number of workers. Usually, what is advised is to do a median or average and to take the highest of the two. Here we see by nationality, but it's not necessarily just by nationality. So a lot of times the workers are hired by batches. So you will hire some workers. If you see the list of years where the workers are hired, usually you will have like 10 workers hired around the same amount, around the same time, under the same labor broker. So the informations that you need are nationality, year of employment, sometimes month, um, and the labor broker. And then you can see, you can have an average based on the interviews that during the investigation that was conducted. In terms of the number of people to be interviewed, I invite you to check the toolkit and the guidance that is available there. It does give some information on what is good practice for the amount of workers to be interviewed. Consider the currency exchange rate. So, for example, worker that has been hired in 2018, if you convert everything in USD for your repayment, make sure that you use the currency exchange from 2018 and not the one from 2025. Consider the inflation also. There is a consideration to opportunity cost that is mentioned in several guidances, including impact, including all the others. For the opportunity cost, what is mentioned on those guidance is 2% year on year. Now, this can be a bit more difficult to push for, I would say, because it is quite arbitrary whether the workers will have invested that money or what they would have done with it. So it is best practice to have the opportunity costs. Minimum practice would be to have the rest, like inflation and things like that. So that can give you also a little room to kind of negotiate or discuss which cost to to repay. But best practice would be to include an opportunity costs. Taxes for the workers. So that's something that is usually not included in the guidance, but that's something that came up in the cases that I worked on. So when you pay the workers, they may have some type of tax refund or tax impact with the repayment, especially if you pay in a lump sum. So it's important to have someone locally in your investigation that can also help understanding the tax implication of the repayment. And also consider setting aside a contingency fund, because when you will do the repayment plan and engage with the workers, or even after, you will sometimes, maybe some workers will come forward later, or there will be some discrepancies or administrative costs that comes with like transferring the money. And again, the employer burden of proof, that the workers should not be required to present receipts, because we understand that they may not have receipts for things that they've paid. So it's important to triangulate. Basically, when you do the investigation, you talk to the workers, but you can also triangulate with external stakeholders. So you can talk to local organizations, local NGOs that work with migrant workers, um, local, yeah, industry unions or things like that. And you can check with them what is in their understanding, the usual fee that workers pay for different corridors, so that you can kind of triangulate with what the workers have said. It's very important, again, to have someone locally that understand the local context, so that you make sure that they know you're not missing fees, and outside of what the workers say, like an average of like whether, if it fits together. And another source of information is, of course, the company documents. So all the workers, when they come from the agency, they will have their agency contracts. So usually there is a minimum payment that has been declared, depending on the country. There are payments that have been declared by the agency that can be taken as a minimum evidence, but usually it's very under what has been paid in reality, but at least it gives you a minimum amount. Okay, then we can go to the next one. All right.